Okay, so the channel has recently ticked over 880 subscribers. This is why we're doing a special live stream. I'm currently on holiday for a couple of days, or vacation if you are from North America. A fair bit has happened in sport. Obviously, Italy getting knocked out of World Cup qualifying. They will not be at the Qatar World Cup at the end of the year. But Canada have qualified for their first FIFA World Cup since 1986. And so they are an unknown quantity at the World Cup. They haven't been there for such a long time. So I'd be interested to see how the Canadians do, and well played to them. There's some other nations as well that are on the chopping block that may not make it. Some bigger nations may not make it to the World Cup. So we'll have to wait and see how the rest of the World Cup playoffs play out. Obviously, also in other news, the RFU have confirmed that Eddie Jones' successor as England head coach will be an English coach, will not be an overseas coach. This is a change of direction the RFU are taking. Obviously, following the 2015 World Cup, after Stuart Lancaster's disastrous time in charge, his contract was not renewed and he was let go. Andy Farrell was his assistant at the time. He's now gone on to do great things with the Ireland setup. Could Andy Farrell come back into the conversation? Can he rebuild those bridges with the RFU? Possibly. It depends, obviously, how much his get-out clause of his contract with the Irish Union will cost the RFU. Obviously, Steve Borthwick at Leicester is another contender, considering how he's turned around Leicester's fortunes in the Premiership. Rob Baxter at Exeter is yet another front runner to be lined up to replace Eddie Jones. And of course, the RFU have given themselves 18 months to find a suitable successor for Eddie Jones. But they may move before the World Cup. Eddie Jones is under a lot of pressure. The summer tours and England's upcoming internationals this summer and autumn will go a long way to decide if he actually makes it to the World Cup or not. I believe it makes more sense to keep him in position, but the performances on the field aren't replicating the talent depth that England have. And there have been some questionable performances and some questionable selections since the 2019 World Cup. Yes, there are some players missing through injury and retirement that were there in 2019 that aren't there now. There have been two salary cap scandals that I think have impacted the England setup, especially the Saracens salary cap scandal. Obviously, some players had to move on from Saracens. Other players were playing in the Rugby Championship rather than the Premiership. And that had an impact on who was eligible to be selected. So you have to bear that in mind. But he is a coach under a lot of pressure. The same with Wayne Pivac. Obviously, the domestic game in Wales has got a lot of financial difficulties, and a lot of Welsh fans feel disconnected with the fact that the professional game in Wales is very southern Wales centric, Cardiff, Swansea, that kind of corridor on the M4 in the south of Wales on the south coast. A lot of fans from the rest of Wales, the west, the central and north, feel very disconnected with the club game, and also poor attendances and empty seats at various fixtures, including the Wales-France game and the Wales-Italy games at home. A lot of unsold seats at the Principality, the former Millennium Stadium. Criticism over the ticket price, especially the Friday night game in Cardiff. There was a lot of criticism in the hours and days following the defeat to France towards the end of the Six Nations in regards to 10,000 empty seats. That is not a good look. A lot of criticism, as I say, over the kickoff time, the fact it was a Friday night game, and ticket price was the big one. Put a lot of fans off, considering the economics obviously that's going on right now. But the Welsh game has had a lot of problems since before the 2019 World Cup. And in the build-up to that World Cup, Rob Howley, the assistant coach, was implicated in a betting scandal. He was booted out and replaced by Stephen Jones at short notice. Even though Stephen Jones was going to be part of Wayne Pivac's coaching team, they'd already announced Gatland's successor was going to be Wayne Pivac, but the results, apart from last year's Six Nations, haven't been great for Wayne Pivac. He's another coach under a lot of pressure. And the situation with Wales is a lot different to England. They have obviously been looking at overseas coaching talent in the Welsh game for quite some time, especially at test level with Gatland and now Wayne Pivac. They haven't really figured out a succession plan and what is Wales' direction going forward. Same with England to a certain extent. What is their direction? What direction do they want to take? The fact they've come out with the statement. The RFU saying they are going to go with an English head coach following the next World Cup is I think, very, very interesting and clear statement. Um, but there are only a handful of candidates that I think could fulfil the Test coaching role. Um, could they try and entice Sean Edwards to the RFU, considering what he's done with Wales and now what he is doing with France? And same for Andy Farrell in a head coach capacity. I think he's better as a head coach than as assistant. But obviously, his time with Stuart Lancaster didn't end on the happiest of terms. But since the 2003 World Cup, I don't think England are on the same level as what they were 19 years ago. It'll be 20 years next year since they won the World Cup in Australia, and a lot of water has gone under the bridge. Um, it'll be very, very interesting to see um, the direction England take. We've got a depth of talent. There is no doubt on that. And of course, players like Marcus Smith are clearly the way forward. They're young, they're dynamic, they're expansive in their game. They like playing this unstructured attacking style naturally. And I feel England's style of play and tactics don't necessarily suit Marcus Smith. Because some of the selections in certain positions, it's an overly structured game from England, and the way rugby union is going with more teams playing this unstructured style, does that actually really suit Marcus Smith's strengths? Now, he's not the all-rounded player yet. He's still a bit of a raw talent, although he has been playing for Harlequins for several seasons now, and he's very, very competent as well. He's not a bad player. There's still areas of Marcus Smith's game management, the defensive side, because it's a 15-man defensive line now. You cannot have a weak link in defence that he sort of needs to work on. I did notice they were protecting Marcus Smith in defence by putting him in wider, non-traditional fly half channels in the defensive line for lengthy periods. And so they have to strengthen him defensively. He's a younger version of Danny Cipriani with, I think, a little bit more upside when it comes to peak talent. I don't think he's fully reached his potential yet. And if you take Marcus Smith out of that England side, England may finish fifth or lower. I think he was exceptionally crucial to how England played, getting victories where without him there they would have lost those games. But game management's still an issue for England. The Scotland game stands out for me. At Murrayfield, they were in a winning position, and the last 20 minutes it all completely fell apart after Marcus Smith gets taken off. So the game management side of things for England are a big concern. You could argue Owen Farrell, obviously, he's not everyone's cup of tea, but he's a key leader in that dressing room. Him being out injured and not around the squad even for training purposes was a big blow. Courtney Laws wasn't fit at the opening stages of the tournament. So there was a bit of a leadership lacking. That I think is another concern. I think that England need to look at is their leadership group. And some of their squad selections and omitting certain players and not bringing some experienced players, even as a short-term measure for this Six Nations with the injuries and players unavailable for selection, is a bit of a head-scratcher, especially in the fly half position and the scrum half position. There are other scrum halves and fly halves who could have filled a temporary role for this Six Nations to help guide some of these younger players like Marcus Smith along in training and in the squad dynamic. That's a bit of a head scratcher. I mean, there was Bath players in the squad, but no Worcester players, for example. Bath, I think, are worse than Worcester right now this season. Newcastle are doing better than Bath this season. Some of the squad selections I am scratching my head at, and some of the tactics used as well. And that's where Eddie Jones is under pressure, but he's not the sole selector. Obviously, the whole coaching setup and selecting staff do look at teams, but there were some head scratching selections and playing players out of position. At one point against France, we had three fullbacks on the field. And they were out and out fullbacks. I mean, you can play a fullback on the wing or in outside centre as a one-off measure if there is an injury or a suspension to a player. But to do that in such a key game, even though England couldn't win the Six Nations, such a key game against possibly one of their biggest rivals in the sport, really made me scratch my head, especially when you've got Ellis Genge doing fullback runs. When the ball's kicked deep, he was basically in the fullback channel. It's a rugby league style return we do off a kickoff. And the French dealt with that very, very easily because he's going to tire in scrums and rucks and mauls. The French were loving that because they have a big, powerful pack, and if you're going to tire out your key front rower, that's the way to do it, by unnecessarily running in from deep. He's not going to pass the ball. He's just going to try and hit it up. There's not going to be any expansive play there. The French defence love that. Sean Edwards, as a rugby league-based coach, because that's the sport he came from, is going to love defending those kind of plays because guess what? That's how rugby league kick returns are generally done. You get a big forward to do the first or second hit up. that was a really interesting and a failed ploy by England. Um, that's another reason why I think Eddie Jones is under a lot of criticism. There is thinking out the box, and then there's an idea that just doesn't work after the first few minutes. Scrap the idea and have a plan B. England didn't seem to have a plan B in a lot of situations. Um, Another thing that is a bit frustrating is the refereeing consistency throughout the Six Nations, especially when it came to head contact, high tackles, suspendable offences, red card and yellow card offences. Ireland benefited from 2 red cards to the opposition in consecutive games against Italy and against England, but the consistency wasn't applied to the Irish side of things when it came to similar foul play, be it accidental or deliberate, clumsy intent or deliberate intent to injure or tackle high. That was a bit frustrating. Um, I have to admit, though, both red cards under the current interpretation of the rules for the Italian player and the English player were justified if we're going by proper interpretation, but then there is some other foul play that the Irish did get away with. And it's a bit frustrating as an Irish fan and as an Italian fan that there wasn't that consistency in the Italy-Ireland game. It was frustrating. There can be no complaints from Italy or England for those red cards those players received. But the players are now fully aware. This rule for dangerous head contact's been in place for 2.5 years in the build up to the 2019 World Cup. It's been in place for a while now. It's not a rule they've just brought in for this season. It's been going on for this 3rd season. This interpretation's been in place. So even now, tackle technique is still absolutely shocking in the senior men's game. This is why sometimes I actually prefer watching women's rugby. Their tackle technique is better. It's more refreshing to watch their scrummaging technique and their ruck and maul. There's less head-high contact. There's less foul play. There's less accidental head contact. The technique is a lot better. There's actually less concussions. There's less HIA protocols being used, not because being enacted, should I say, that the protocols are exactly the same. The rules are exactly the same. What I'm noticing is in the women's game, obviously it's less professional. There's fewer professional contracts, etc. The tackle technique, the tackle area, the rock and roll area is a lot tidier. The scrummaging is a lot better. And there are less head injuries as a result because they are tackling in the correct way that you were told to tackle at school level. So in the men's game, the tackle technique is appalling. Quite frankly, there are some really poor tackle techniques. Now, whether that's just getting into bad habits as an individual player, or down to coaching and the players as well, getting it wrong. You have to ask a few questions about the tackle technique and going too high or getting your head in the wrong position, because it's a bad advert for young kids wanting to play the game, watching these senior professionals at the top level basically give themselves and their opposition players long-term head injuries and neck injuries. It's really not good. It's not a good watch. It is quite concerning. And I don't know what to really make of it. I could say when I was playing, I was a little bit guilty of poor tackle technique. As a smaller player trying to take on a bigger player, you've got to try and stop them any way you can. The seatbelt style tackle we can't do anymore. Obviously, the game has evolved. Player welfare has definitely taken a step forward. However, I think there's still further we can go. I think, on a personal standpoint, and people may disagree with me on this, and if you're rewatching this live stream at a later date about concussions, I think there needs to be a mandatory stand-down period. Because even if you pass the HIA, if you were deemed to have to go for an HIA, there's a concern that even though you may not have been concussed at the time, delayed concussion syndrome, delayed concussion symptoms can kick in hours or even days after you've had the whiplash or head knock. I can tell from personal experience with a friend of mine, it took 6-7 hours for his concussion symptoms to kick in, and we had to rush him to hospital. He had a bleed on the brain. So it doesn't necessarily happen instantaneously, getting poleaxed. And sometimes you can get knocked out and not actually concussed. The sheer shock of the impact can knock you clean out. And you can not get bashed in the head and have a concussion from whiplash. So I believe if you go for an HIA, even if you pass said HIA, you shouldn't return to the game. And if you are found to have failed the HIA assessment, I think you should have a mandatory stand-down period like you have in boxing. If you've been proven to be knocked out in boxing, you have a minimum stand-down period where you can't train, contact, or box again for a period of months. Now, We've seen the same issues in the NRL and Super League when it comes to HIA protocols and consistency, and match day doctors overruling team doctors, which I think is the way to go. They've obviously got to implement those systems correctly. There have been some really, really nasty looking concussions in both the women's and men's NRL competitions this season, and rightly so. The match day doctor said, no, you're coming off, regardless if the player or the on field doctor for the team has said, actually, no, he's okay. There was a couple in the Canterbury North Queensland game that were like absolutely really nasty, and I don't believe those players who ended up playing following on, because allegedly they passed the HIA protocols in the weeks following, and they played in the following games. Some of them were quite serious. There are some players who have failed HIA protocols and aren't eligible for selection this coming match day weekend. We've seen a suspension for a deliberate forearm shot to the head from Mitch Barnett for the Newcastle Knights. I have to look at the length of suspension he received, but it's somewhere between 8 and 10. I believe it could be as high as 12 weeks. I'm going to have to double check how long he had his judiciary meeting earlier today. I'll have to see how long he actually gets on the judiciary for his headshot on an opposition player that resulted in the player leaving the game and not passing protocols to play this weekend. Nelson Solomona, he got away with a headshot on an opposition player. The NRL citing committee and Graham Annesley's come on given a press conference head of rugby operations and said he should have been suspended, but they can't undo the grading that he received from the citing, the match day citing committee in regards to a grade 1 rather than a grade 2 or a grade 3. He gets away with the fine. He should have, and they've admitted, no, he should have been suspended. It should have been upgraded. So already there's a lack of consistency in punishing players for foul play. What's your thoughts on Premier League's clubs lobbying for Champions League reforms, allowing teams to finish outside the top four to qualify to get rid of the UEFA coefficient? I've already spoken, in my view, on how I would reformat the UEFA Cup competitions, Champions League, Europa League, and I would say bring back the Cup Winners' Cup, so the Conference League. You'll get more teams from more leagues. More leagues will be represented at the top level, and you would actually have less matches. It devalues the product. It's been devaluing the product since 1997. One of the reasons why the Champions League was reformatted was the English clubs were allowed to rejoin European competition, and as part of the agreement for them to rejoin after the ban following Hazel, and those English sides that actually did miss out on European qualification because of the UEFA ban, they were sort of like, okay, we have to allow English sides back in. Premier League is one of the biggest leagues we have in Europe for revenue. And it sort of skewed the UEFA coefficient is a broken system. It actually hampers rather than helps the lower leagues or the lesser known leagues in Europe at national level. I've always said bring back the Cup Winners' Cup, single round knockouts rather than group stages for the Europa League and Champions League, and reform it that way. But the TV companies and the sponsors have far too much sway on how competitions are done these days. Same with the World Cup going to Qatar, for example. Same with the F1 going to Saudi Arabia and Abu Dhabi and Bahrain. It's the money. They're the three of the biggest contracts that F1 has. 70 million, I believe, is the annual contract for the Saudi GP, and it's one of the longest term contracts on the calendar. It's very hard for them to get out of that contract unless there's a severe change in the political stance of Saudi Arabia or security concerns in Saudi Arabia. The coefficient doesn't work. It hampers the development of the other European leagues outside the Big Five, for Champions League and Europa League qualification. Hence why they brought the Conference League in. But even then, the Big Five leagues still get more teams in the Conference League per league size over, let's say, the Polish League or the Swedish League or the Swiss League. It completely devalues those competitions because 3/4 of the Champions League sides that qualify from England haven't won the championship. You could have 2 different cup winners. They both qualify for the Europa League. So you could have 6 or 7 different teams, maybe even 8 teams You think about it, if you let's say Crystal Palace win the FA Cup this season, they're going to finish outside the top 7, top 8, unless they go on a massive run towards the end of the season, which they are capable of doing. They're in that kind of position where they could leapfrog some sides, and they're finishing outside the standard European spaces. They can qualify for a European Cup competition by winning a domestic trophy. Hence why you should bring back the Cup Winners' Cup. It makes more logical sense than reformatting the two existing competitions, which they've done consistently since 1997. And they've rebranded both competitions since 1992. So UEFA have caved into commercial reasons rather than footballing reasons and the integrity reasons of the competition, obviously, to maximise revenues. And there's so many dead rubbers in the group stages of these competitions that really players get unnecessarily taxed with workload, injuries, suspensions that are unnecessary, and it does impact domestic form as well. You get that European hangover, as they call it, for some clubs, if they've got a weaker squad depth because they're playing more games. Managers have always been saying since the late 90s, fixture congestion is killing us, and it also then devalues the domestic cup competitions like the FA Cup and League Cup, for example. Some countries got rid of their League Cup altogether, and managers are always saying, we haven't got enough fit players, we haven't put youth players out, etc., etc. But the owners are raking in money. So it's all about money rather than competition integrity. And honestly, I believe player welfare. And the fans always get put last as well. Look at the FA Cup semi-final between Liverpool and Man City. Both clubs have put in petitions to have that final move because of transport concerns. Euston Station and northbound approaches to London from Euston Station as engineering works. The FA have been aware of this for 3 years. Look, if they can move a Champions League final within a few days from St. Petersburg to Paris on an expediency measure, they can quite easily move an FA Cup final. But again, the corporates have too much say. The TV companies probably have too much say. But when Wembley's basically empty in a couple of weeks' time for that semi-final, it's going to be massive. I hope the City and Liverpool fans stay away and make the FA look stupid because it will affect their bottom line. The FA, again, not listening to clubs and fans when they have legitimate concerns about not only fans being able to get to the ground safely, but the fact that the FA will put 100 buses on. That's not even going to fill capacity Wembley. And the corporate tier is the second tier, which is the smallest part of the stadium, the seating. It's not a good look. It's the same with the Challenge Cup in Rugby League as well. Unfortunately, the RFL are contracted to Wembley until 2027, so it's 5 more years of possibly declining attendances for the Challenge Cup final in a couple of months. And the RFL and fans, even let's say London Broncos fans alike, who will go there as neutrals, are saying this is not a good image for our sport. This is not growing the sport in the south of the UK. The RFL needs a complete clear out. They signed that contract. They signed that long-term contract when Wembley was rebuilt, and they stuck with it. They signed it for 20 years. They are stuck with it. The FA are loving it because it's their stadium. They're making revenue off the RFL. It's an agreement that benefits the FA, not the RFL, for how much the RFL has to pay to have the stadium for the day. And Wembley's not even being used for the Rugby League World Cup. It's the Emirates in London that's the stadium being used. So that tells you all you need to know with the RFL. We're looking at going, we're not giving the FA any more money. For Nelson Solomona, that was a bad one. Really bad one. Lack of consistency by the NRL disciplinary committee. And when Graham Annesley is coming out in the press conference on the Monday saying, look, we got it wrong, it was a suspendable offence for grade 2 level, possibly grade 3 if the player had left the field, which he didn't. He wasn't injured. He didn't leave the field. He didn't have to complete an HIA protocol, which again, as head contact, you should automatically be going sent for an HIA. If he'd stayed down, he gets straight back up and wants to fight Nelson. So I say bring back the biff. I can't believe now he's fighting. That's a suspension. I say bring back a bunch of 5s because I tell you, players who are dirty will get called, sort out a lot quicker, and they'll probably be less likely to try a dirty shot again. Like with Mitch Barnett, his excuse was it was accidental. No, you can see him deliberately raise the arm and clock him with the point of his elbow in the neck and chin. That could have ruptured his larynx. Look what happened to Andrew Fafita last season. He had a ruptured larynx and was put in an induced coma for 3 days and had issues breathing and had to have emergency throat surgery. And that was again an opposition player raising their forearm to the throat area. there has to come a point where technique has to change. But the Mitch Barnett one, I mean, the Fafita injury last year was accidental. There's no intent from the player to rupture his larynx, but there is an intent to bump off the opposition player with a forearm rather than a handoff. That's my opinion. You always go with the handoff. I was always taught handoff, never lead with your forearm, because you do run the risk of A, injuring yourself because you can actually break your forearm or your elbow, rupture ligaments, and B, injuring your opposition player because it's duty of care. Regardless if you're a defender or attacker, it's duty of care to your opponent. And then if you're raising it to throw head high, you are running the risk of seeing 10 minutes or a send off and or a suspension. And in Mitch Barnett's case, I'm going to have to check what the disciplinary committee have said and how long he's suspended for, but it's going to be a lengthy chunk of the season. That is definitely going to harm the Newcastle Knights forward depth. He knew straight away when he was called over by the referee he was in serious trouble. This is not the 80s anymore. There are TV cameras in every corner of the ground. You cannot get away with that kind of offence. It's the same with the NHL when players give head-high shots and slew foots and elbows and dirty late hits. You cannot get away with it anymore. This is not the 80s. This is the 2020s. 30, 40 years down the line. It's not tolerated. You're going to get a lengthy spell suspended. I mean, ask Brad Marchand and Tom Wilson in the NHL. Brad Marchand is the most suspended player in NHL history. He's not the biggest guy, but he does some really stupid things. Tom Wilson, one of the most suspended players in NHL history. They both play a similar role, ironically, in a top six forward role, but their dirty play mitigates the skill that they have. And they are physical players, and they will do the shutting down, checking role if they have to. They will do penalty killing roles. They will do everything. But again, the Sundqvist hit from Wilson a couple of years ago, where he shattered his face, completely blindsided him, lined him up from a distance. He originally got 20 games. They appealed. They got it reduced to 16. Fans were split on it. Brad Marchand. How much longer can you tolerate that? That's a coach killer. When one of your best players is sitting out for multiple games in a season, which will impact the team, it's a coach killer. It could have broken his neck or led to paralysis. I wouldn't go. I'll be more concerned for the back of the head, for any kind of fractures or bleeds on the brain. It was a swinging arm. There was no intent to wrap. The player's clearly already falling. There is no need for him to join that tackle at that point. The player has been tackled. That is an unnecessary action from Nelson. I believe he should get about 4 weeks for that. Just as a precedent to say, look, this is unacceptable. That was a premeditated swinging arm, in my opinion. He's got form for it. But they've got rid of loading now. So a player's past history in the previous 18 months to 2 years doesn't count against them now. I think if it's a repeat offender, you add an extra game, because they committed an offence before, you add an extra game. If Latrell Mitchell gets 6 weeks for shattering Joe Manu's face and doesn't get sent off completely for that, Mitch Barnett, okay, the player hasn't got any facial fractures or anything like that, or any throat injury, but he did not return to play and has failed HIA protocol, so he is going to miss at least one game, possibly two, if not more, and he does get sent off. I think the NRL were on the back foot after the Latrell Mitchell incident where he only got 10 minutes in the sin bin. He should have been sent for that. That was, again, players falling, the tackle is being made. If Joe Manu's actually not been pulled down by Johnson on the wing, Latrell's going to smash him in the jaw and the throat. It'd be actually a more serious injury. I honestly believe that. It would have been a more serious injury because he would have been slightly higher and the shoulder would have hit him here rather than here. So I think in the process of being tackled, that's actually saved Joe Manu from not only career-ending, but life-changing injury. But this is where rugby league and to a certain extent rugby unions have the same issue as well, with throat and face contact with forearms. But it's the lack of consistency that is frustrating, the lack of disciplinary consistency, refereeing missed calls. We're only 3 weeks into the season, and already we are, as fans, left frustrated and scratching our heads because on the eve of the season, they came out with yet another protocol change. Rather than doing it after the grand final and announcing it in the post-season or the off-season, going, well, we've studied some incidents, we believe this is areas of the game we need to clear up. They did it days before the season kicked off 3-4 weeks ago. So that was that was a very poor way of dealing with it. I felt they could have dealt with it with changes to protocols involving the match day doctor, the HIA protocols, removing loading from suspensions. They could have dealt with that better and done it sooner rather than leaving it so late in the pre-season before announcing days before the season starts. This is what we're doing, and already there's been a lack of consistency in the first 3 weeks of the season. Some players have got lengthy suspensions, other players haven't been suspended at all and got away with fines. Some hits have been completely missed and not deemed even a grade 1 when they should be. Other ones have been graded too highly, but there have been some bad ones. So we'll have to see what happens this weekend. There's some big matches this weekend. The referees and the disciplinary committee, the citing committee, are going to be under the spotlight even more. And all we can hope for is this weekend, if there's, let's say, several similar incidents in, let's say, 4 of the games, there's 5 incidents. All 5 of them are judged in the same way. If a player gets 4 weeks for a headshot, another guy should get 4 weeks minimum, rather than, okay, this guy's getting 6 weeks, this guy's getting 4, but it's exactly the same style of incident. If this guy's getting 6 to 8 on the grading, when he goes to the judiciary, if he pleads guilty, early plea, gets a game off, fine. If the other guy goes, I didn't intend to smash him in the face, there has to be consistency. Yes, they have to judge it on a case-by-case basis, but I do believe a player's previous suspension history should come into consideration if they are a repeat offender for foul play. I think, in my opinion, you add a game. A game or 2. I think you have to. If a player continues to commit foul play on the field and a 4 to 6 week suspension is enough, make it 7 to 8. Really hurt the player and hurt the team. He will quickly change his attitude when the coach is going, you're a key player and you're out for 8 weeks. That's 2 months. A month out, okay, we can mitigate that. 2 months out, okay, that's testing our squad depth now. That's punishing the team now. You've got to change. There are players coming off contract this season as well. Coaches will be looking at, okay, this player's a liability. He's costing us too many games. He's costing us too many points for being off the field. Is it worth re-signing this guy? He's continually doing these things. That's my opinion. I believe in, you have to look at a player's previous history. It's the same with driving bans. If a guy's been banned for 12 months for speeding or drink driving, second offence, it's longer, isn't it? It's the same with criminal offences. If you've been done for burglary once and you breached your licence, you're going to get a longer sentence. It's quite simple. How in everyday walks of life, if you've been had 3 verbal warnings at work and then you get a written, it escalates because of your previous previous misdeeds. It's the same with. Let's have a look. 6 weeks. Mitch Barnett gets 6 weeks for his headshot on a Penrith Panther player. I was thinking more 8 weeks because it was I believe it was premeditated. He gets 6, but because the injury is, I think, less severe than what happened to Joe Manu, I think looking at how that's gone, I'm surprised it was as light as it is. But we're going by precedent. It has sort of been set in stone. He was disciplined. He was sent off on the day. Not just sin bin. He was sent from the field. That automatically carries a ban with it. So that's going to be added on to his suspension. Will be the fact he's automatically got a ban for a send off, and he's put in an early guilty plea. So that will reduce his suspension. But they add on the send off as a game. So he would have got 7 weeks anyway, I think. But they've now set a precedent. Anything similar happens with a headshot like that, you're looking at a 6 weeks minimum, maybe 7 without an early guilty plea. 6 to 8 now we're looking at as a precedent with Mitch Barnett. I'm surprised he got the lower end of this. A lot of the media were looking at 8 to 10. He gets the lower end of the 6 to 10 kind of bracket. So we'll see if a similar instance happens with another player this season. Look for them to try and get for a lengthier suspension precedent being set. He takes the early guilty plea, but make of that what you will. I think that's a light suspension for the premeditated act of a hit to the head that caused another opposition player to leave the field injured. Obviously, the injury isn't as severe. There's no fractures. There's no breaks, unlike Joey Manu. So that's where I'm thinking with the new suspension protocols in regards to they removed previous loading. And Mitch Barnett has had a few games on the sidelines before. I would say look at a player's previous history. If they're repeat offenders, I say add games, but there are those saying it shouldn't be that way. Saudi Arabia could host the Usyk Joshua fight in late June. That's interesting. There's pressure on Joe Root to step down as England captain. We've got no cricketing director of performance. We've got no head coach at the moment on a permanent basis. I think Joe Root's done. I think he's cooked. Medvedev, tennis players doing quite well. Here we go. Ten Hag, who's been heavily linked and is in discussions with Man United. Former Man United boss Louis van Gaal suggested Eric Ten Hag should rule out a move to the Red Devils because they are a commercial club. United have spoken to Ten Hag about their vacant manager's position. Interim boss Ralph Rangnick, who replaced Solskjaer, will be in charge until the summer. That was a mistake. I'm not going to advise Eric Ten Hag, this is Van Gaal, but he must choose a football club and not a commercial club. He's got a contract with the reigning Dutch champions until next season, and I actually want to keep him personally. They believe he's the right man to replace Rangnick. Paris Saint-Germain boss Pochettino was also in our shortlist, and Lopetegui of Sevilla and Luis Enrique are also. I'm not so sure they'll be the right fit because their style of play, they play without a centre forward, and that's not United style. Van Gaal, who won the FA Cup during his spell at Old Trafford, suggested that Ten Hag should consider his options carefully. He's a great coach, and that's always good for Man United. But Manchester United also are commercial clubs, which is a difficult choice for a coach. You better go to a football club. And I do believe Man United have got their priorities wrong. Structures at the club are wrong, in my opinion. If Barcelona are hoping to sign Mohamed Salah, but La Liga's finance rules prevent that because of their losses. European Belgian player Van Dam has died at age 28. Miguel Van Dam, Belgian footballer, died at age 28 after a battle with cancer. He had leukemia. He was playing for Cercle Bruges. He was a goalkeeper. He's battled it for 5 years. That is terribly sad. Wayne Hennessy is to win his 100th cap as Wales goalkeeper against the Czechs. Oh dear. The NFL franchises must appoint a diverse person, so forced diversity, which is a big issue in the NFL with the Rooney Rule. Not so keen on that. Should be the best possible person for the job. Today's friendlies. England play Ivory Coast at 7:45. Major changes have been made for that game. I don't put a lot of stock in friendlies. I didn't watch the Swiss game. Canadian gymnasts call for investigation into toxic culture and abusive practices. So gymnastics again facing negative headlines. That's a sport that's had negative headlines for years following the US investigation to US gymnastics. The Jacksonville Jaguars are to play at Wembley until 2024. I'm going to have to do a video on this because NFL videos do quite well on the channel. Jacksonville Jaguars to play at Wembley through till 2024. That's 2 more years of watching a crap team play. The Jaguars have committed to playing a home game at Wembley each year through to 2024. They've been playing each season since 2013. Now the Jags will be playing for 2 more years of mediocrity. So he currently owns the Jags, and Fulham was a great pleasure. He did try to buy the stadium for a discount price, and we told him to F off. Lovely. Since the NFL's international games began in 2007, the Jaguars have made 8 trips to London, more than any other NFL team. It's hard to believe we'll have been there 3 years until last game at Wembley. Good, because you're crap. We've built a great fan base. Really haven't. You haven't got fans at home, let alone over here. The NFL's international expansion has also gone to Germany now. They've also signed a contract in Germany until 2025 for a game per season. There's 3 overseas games in London, 1 in Mexico, and 1 in Munich. So I'll do a video on the Jacksonville Jaguars extending their London stay until 2024. I think the international series may have run its course personally. That's my personal opinion on it. I think it's an interesting idea. Obviously, the plan was to have an NFL team in London already by this point. I've done videos on the subject over the years. it's an interesting one. Sahid Khan did obviously try to buy Wembley back in 2018. The reaction to his attempted purchase was wholly negative by a majority of people, and those in favour were being turned off European football for a long time. They weren't fans of the FA. The problem with that attempted sale by the FA is the taxpayers, the UK taxpayers, did pump money into the build of the stadium, the rebuild of the stadium, the new Wembley. And the issue is the stadium was over budget. It was delayed. It's like a 6-7 year gap between demolition of the old stadium and the new stadium being completed, which didn't go down well. The new stadium has been heavily criticised over the years. Club Wembley has been criticised. That's ticketing over the years. Not a lot of infrastructure has changed around the stadium, with the transport links and the links to the stadium still being pretty similar to what they were pre-2001. Locals aren't necessarily in favour of having the national stadium at Wembley anymore. The local area, does it benefit as much as it should? But the attempted sale for half price, considering that property prices have only gone up since 2007, went down really poorly. Greg Clark, though, who was FA chair at the time, is now gone. He's no longer in his position. He faced a lot of criticism at the time for the attempted sale of Wembley. So yes, we can definitely do a video on the NFL, Jacksonville Jaguars extending to play games at Wembley until 2024. The fact the team isn't very, very good is the club have got thousands of fans over here is ridiculous. They are one of the worst teams in NFL history. Never won a Super Bowl, never been to a Super Bowl. They're absolutely appalling team. They can't even draw fans at their home stadium. Now, obviously, White Hart Lane, the rebuilt White Hart Lane has an NFL contract as well. That's part of the reason why they rebuilt the thing. Again, Tottenham, another commercial club with no footballing sense, just chasing the money. And of course, they're now taking games to Mexico and Germany as well. I feel the London series has run its course. I really do. I do honestly believe the London series has run its course now. There's clearly not going to be a team in Europe at any point, especially London. I think that boat has sailed a long time ago. I think the opportunity to have a London team is long gone, in my opinion. There obviously were opportunities in the past, but when the NBA and NHL regularly take regular and pre-season games to Europe, London, and they've been all over Europe. And I think back in 2018, around the time of the attempted sale of Wembley, the muted sale of Wembley, the idea of selling the stadium, the NBA, the Boston Celtics were the home team in their overseas series. And I can't remember which broadcaster or media outlet was interviewing the Boston Celtics CEO, and they were interviewing. This is one of the biggest franchises in the NBA, one of the most successful franchises in NBA history, one of the most historical teams. They go and ask him, what is the likelihood of having a North American major league franchise of the 4 major leagues in Europe? Specifically London, I think, was the question, but I think Europe as a general wide. And he was like, 0. It economically makes no sense. Plus, the players' associations would have to vote in favour or against relocating or expanding to a new location. There has to be owners have to be on board with it, 2/3 majority, and the players again I think have a similar voting structure where there's a minimum threshold if there's a change to the CBA, or if they want to make changes to a CBA mid CBA, or discussions around the CBA. And I don't think the players were in favour of a long-term plan to have an expansion or relocated team in London or across Europe for any of the major franchises and in the major leagues. So when a similarly wealthy league in the NBA was like, it's not going to happen, it makes no economic sense, tells you all you need to know, because you've got to factor in ticket price, exchange rate, tax, because if they're working here and earning money here, they would have to register here for tax purposes, and that will affect what kind of players you can sign as free agents. The UK tax system for higher earners is different to the US, especially Florida. Let's say Jacksonville were to relocate, the higher threshold for tax is different, which would affect free agent signings and actually building a competitive team. You would have to try and win over the other 29 NFL fan bases in the UK, because every team has a fan base over here. There's fans of every team in the UK. You'd have to try and win them over to create a London fan base. It's very London-centric. rather than UK-wide, like taking games on the road, home games around various big stadiums in the UK. That would hamper any kind of growth of the sport over here, I feel. And fans have said with the London series, it would be nice to see games in Manchester, games in Scotland, games in Wales and Cardiff. Fans have stated for a long time it would be nice to see games in other locations around the UK and some of the big stadiums we have. That's been stated multiple times by NFL fan groups in the UK. They focused on London, but there are some other brilliant cities such as Cardiff, Manchester, and Newcastle that have big stadiums as well, where it could work and could draw good crowds. And Glasgow and Edinburgh as well, with like the likes of Murrayfield and Hampden Park. You know, NFL fans across the UK have said for a long time it would be nice to see the London series become a UK kind of series, take things on the road outside of Greater London. They haven't done that. So that's already alienated a fair few NFL fans from the London series. And that's something that would also prove an obstacle, is winning over fans from outside London to a permanent location and a permanent team. And the fail of the purchase of Wembley as well, you've got to find a team that's willing to share their stadium. A football team in this country willing to share their stadium with an NFL team for a large portion of the season. And then you've got to factor in fixturing with the Football League and the Premier League and internationals as well for availability of stadia to play games in. And it becomes a bit more tricky then with the TV contracts and sponsorship contracts and football fixturing that's already in place. It becomes a bit more of a nightmare. You would have to get the FA on board, the Premier League or the Championship on board, depending on what stadium they want to use. Other than Wembley and White Hart Lane, you would have to possibly get the RFU on board if you want to use Twickenham again. And then you have to talk to your UEFA as well with clashes with Champions League and Europa League fixtures. There's a whole bag of commercial agreements that are already in place for stadium use. And it becomes a bit more of a headache. Obviously, the FA would be rubbing their hands with glee because the amount of money the FA have made off the NFL London Series since 2007 is a huge amount of cash. Huge amount. The RFU made some big money as well, while Twickenham was being used and Tottenham were sharing Wembley with various other sports, and their stadium was being rebuilt. So Twickenham and the RFU made some money out of it as well. But there is that kind of commercial clash between an already established, financially viable, allegedly, league in the Premier League and to a certain extent the EFL Championship and the various FA competitions like the FA Cup and the EFL League Cup and things like that in regards to the NFL and fixture clashes and stadium availability and fans already, and sports fans are generally annoyed with the FA and Club Wembley and the stadium and the infrastructure and getting there. As we've seen with the FA Cup semi-final, where Liverpool Man City have put in a request that's been denied by the FA, and the response on social media has been visceral towards the Football Association. The Football Association is actually a breakdown in trust between the FA, fans, and the clubs. There's a lack of trust between all the stakeholders within the sport, and that has been exacerbated in recent years, throughout the history of the channel, basically. I go back as far as Sam Allardyce getting sacked as England manager, Mark Sampson getting sacked as the women's England manager. The FA has been dragged across select committees in Parliament in regards to some of its structures and some of its commercial decisions and the direction it's taking and the diversity issues and bullying and culture issues within the organisation. The FA has faced a lot of negative press, has been regularly criticised for a lot of decisions it has taken in the last 5-6 years. And then with the whole pandemic situation as well, with some of the issues that arose over the last 2 years, and the handling of those issues over the last 2 years have raised a lot of questions about governance within the FA, the directors' test they've implemented that's failed, financial fair play rules, the profit loss rules. The Premier League and EFL boards have also been heavily criticised. Several clubs have been heavily criticised by their own fans, let alone opposition fans. So the governance side of the game has been heavily criticised for quite a few years now from fans in the game. The FA aren't immune from that. I think UEFA as well has faced a lot of criticism in over recent years in regards to um, the pan-European Euros. It was a great tournament to watch. I'm not denying that, but some of the locations where they've gone for European Cup finals, the issues with crowd disorder at Euro 2016 in France. A whole host of issues. The Nations League that gets mixed reviews in regards to some fans really enjoy it, some fans don't. Um, the current international calendar, that's where FIFA gets criticised to a certain extent. The reformatting of the Champions League post next season, the restructuring of leagues to accommodate the World Cup. And UEFA had to be on board on that. If UEFA weren't on board on that, the World Cup really hits the skids in regards to organising it. A whole host of issues. The way clubs were asking for assistance, and the FA were very weak in regards to sorting out financial issues during the pandemic. A whole host of issues. The fact the FA, Greg Clark as chairman's gone. A real lack of leadership at the top of the FA. So there's all these issues to be considered. So yeah, we'll have to see what happens. Right. So in regards to the Jacksonville Jaguars continuing to play games at Wembley until 2024, it is interesting they haven't committed more than 2 years long term about their future in regards to continually playing at least one home game per season in London. But we'll see what happens long term with that decision. And I think there's still 2 teams in the NFL that have never played an overseas series, be it in London, Germany, or Mexico. So there are still teams that haven't played in London yet out of the 30 NFL teams. And of course, whether an individual team signs an agreement, there will be a CBA negotiation in regards to do they want to continue the overseas series and continue taking games out of the US to neutral locations, even though there is a home and away team. I completely understand wanting to sell your product, but European football's tried this, hasn't it? With Spain, trying to take regular season games over to America, and fans were like, no, and the players weren't in agreement. So we'll see what happens at the next NFL CBA, whether the players are continually wanting to play as many games as they are. Do I think there's a market? I'm assuming that's the European European League of American Football. We'll have to wait and see if there's a market for a team in London. I think, as I say, I think the London series has gone on too long now. It is now purely a cash grab by Spurs, the FA, and the NFL. And I don't know. I honestly don't know. There's a reason why NFL Europe failed the first time. It's not doing great this time either. Yeah, there's a reason why it didn't work the first time round. It's going to fail again. I have no doubt on that. Absolutely will fail again. I'm not even sure the economics work. And it's a difficult one. I understand, obviously, you want to grow your brand, grow your league, but London is a very congested sports market anyway. Very, very congested sports market. The cost of living in London is ridiculous in comparison to the rest of the UK, and even in the southeast where I live. 4,000 fans, yeah, great. The actual cost of running an NFL style, league, it's the cost of living is higher. already. Just on a standpoint, um, you know, council tax rates are higher. So if you are let's say the NFL does decide to let's say the NFL does decide, let's say Jacksonville are allowed to relocate to London, to the UK. You've also got your income tax. That's not going to change. So you could earn the same money in Manchester and still pay the 50%. Council tax. Oh yes, local council tax. It is valued at what your property was worth in 1990. So if it's Band Aid, which is what I mean, is your property was valued less than 40,000, you pay Band Aid. Property prices in London are a lot higher than Manchester, and always have. Always have. So your council tax, it's a lot higher in London. Taxes will be Loughborough will be very interesting because Loughborough or Sheffield are where a lot of the university sports programs are based, and the Olympic programs and sporting headquarters for cycling and other sports. Sport cities that have a big sports industry like Sheffield, and Loughborough is a smaller location. There's a lot of sports research and sports science that takes place at Loughborough University. It's one of the premier sports universities for research, development of sport techniques, like aerodynamics and all sorts. Loughborough is the place. Sports technology. Loughborough is the place. You could do the South Coast, but it's whether the local areas, the local councils, the local government are going to be willing to invest in a facility. It's whether the local sports teams are going to want to allow their facilities that they already have to be used. We are talking football and rugby union. I think you'd already have to use an existing facility. I don't whether local authorities with their budget constraints that they currently have under local government have the spare cash to invest. And you've also got to figure out, is this going to clash with the use of facilities we already have for public events other than professional sport as well? There's always a waiting list for concerts, public, sub festivals, music festivals, literary festivals, you know, county fairs. Ironically, a county fair, yes, they are classed as the festival season from like March through to October. Um, Motor vehicle festivals like classic car meets, all these kind of things, stupid things like that. They have to pre-book years in advance to find a location, and you have to get special planning permission from local authorities to host a gathering of a car festival, motorcycle festival, music festival, comic festival, beer festival, county fairs, like county shows, things like that, agricultural festivals, all these kind of festivals. Um, steam fairs, you name it, all the crazy stuff that happens in festival season. They get their licenses years in advance. They have to apply years in advance. And there's a backlog of trying to catch up in 2020 and 2021 where a lot of festivals were cancelled. Councils lost their operating license money from that. They are very keen to clear the backlog, get, license, festival organisers, money back into the council, because the council get money for allowing they rent the space. Yeah, but is Plymouth the right location? It's a military town, and it's not the wealthiest location either. So if you're trying to attract, investment, fine, but it's not the wealthiest part of the UK. There's an established sport football at a professional level in the town already, which draws a decent sized crowd for the location. There's a reasonable population size, but it's not really what I would call an A-list destination. And it's one of them. It is a city that needs a lot of investment. I've got friends from the West Country. It's not far. That is true. It is not far. But would you want to go to Plymouth for the day? Would you want? I mean, Exeter, I think, is a good location as well. You've got a rugby stadium, you've got a football stadium. If it was to be a summer league, you could quite easily do it in Exeter. Exeter's a more touristy kind of city over Plymouth. I've been to Exeter. I've been to that part of the world quite a bit. Exeter's a more touristy kind of location. It's a city with a younger average age population, which is, I think, the market you want to be targeting. And it's got a better sporting record than Plymouth when it comes to, especially with their rugby union side, a more successful sporting city. That's my personal opinion on if I was going to go to the West Country. Bristol as well. Bath, they got the Rec. There are other locations in the West Country which have also got links to tourism that would be a far better bet if you want to make it as part of a tourist experience. But I just don't see American football other than the NFL really drawing well in this country. You've tried it before in the 90s, and the experiment failed after a couple of years. We did try a British American Football League. We did try NFL Europe, and it really didn't work 20 years ago. There's no suggestion it's going to work now long term, viability wise, and long term financially. Look at how the CFL is struggling in North America, and that's an established league that's been going 100 or so years. Teams are basically going bust. And American football is two-stop start. European sports fans want constant action, constantly. I think that's why ice hockey has a very strong following across Europe as the second most popular sport continent-wide. Less stop-start, more fast pace. Fans, it's easy to buy into fans. We as European sport fans expect constant action. We don't like stop-start sport. We like it being constant. Which is, I think, why possibly, and it's got to compete against established sports. Remember this, established professional sports that have been established for a long time, with dedicated fans already and growing fan bases depending on the sport. Structures that have been in place for a very long time, governance, league organisation, grassroots, facilities, infrastructure. It's one of them. It is one of them, and that's another issue it's going to face, is that entrenched structure already in place, be it semi-professional, professional level. I don't think it. I mean, look, that's why I don't think an NFL team in London is going to work anyway. Even if the NFL had gone ahead with the plan they plan to have, I think 2009, 2010, which was at the time of the financial crash, but 12 years ago, they planned to have a team in London by now, so they've already missed the boat. And that's where I think Roger Goodell is a terrible commissioner anyway. And the team owners, 2/3 would have to vote for a relocation because of relocation fees. And then you've got to look at taxes. And, the FA, one of the reasons why the FA agreed to the NFL Series 2007 was to pay off the stadium. The reason why Tottenham have got their agreement is to pay off the stadium. It is literally pay off and then make a profit. The only reason why we have a London series is the FA had to pay off the stadium debt. And the problem with the rebuild of Wembley is taxpayer money helped fund it. So already the FA has backed themselves into a commercial situation where ticket prices are already a massive issue with Wembley. Some of the FA's clients, the RFL, are not happy. Fans aren't happy with the contractual agreements they've already signed, which they're locked into. So the Challenge Cup, for example. The interesting thing is the Rugby League World Cup did not decide to have Wembley as a fixtured stadium. They went with the Emirates. And that, for me, is the biggest indictment of some of the issues. I think Arsenal were more than happy. Arsenal got no major debts. They paid off their stadium. Arsenal were more than happy to go, yeah, we'll have you. We'll have an international tournament at our beautiful modern facility that's already 16 years old this summer. Doesn't look at the Emirates, but it is 16 years old. It opened 2006, and the Emirates, the Arsenal Football Club, they were like, yeah, we're happy to be a host venue for the tournament. And the Emirates is a fantastic facility. Admittedly, in certain seats, you are a little bit away from the action, but it's got a big enough playing surface you can play rugby union and rugby league and NFL on it. I'm very surprised that when Wembley was being used by Spurs, that the Emirates wasn't used, and they went for Twickenham instead. But the RFU obviously wanted some cash. They were more amenable at the time for the use of their facility. It didn't clash with the Autumn Internationals. They were more than happy to have the facility used. They were going to reload the turf anyway. But this is where getting a new league off the ground and using facilities is difficult, because stadium operators and arena operators and local authorities that will grant the operating licenses They know 2, 3 years in advance who's going to be using and had already booked use of facilities years in advance. COVID has obviously impacted that, but event organisers, they put in their applications a year or two in advance for a world tour for a band, or hosting like Donington, the F1, the remote racing track has a long-term agreement with Download Festival. The organisers of that have a long-term agreement to use various areas of the Donington old Grand Prix circuit, the motor racing circuit, paddock and infield. They have a long agreement. They've constantly moved it around the facility, but that facility has a long-term agreement with the organisers of Download Festival. Same with Reading Festival. The same location is used for Reading Festival year after year. The long-term organisers have a standing agreement with the landowner and the local council and the police. They constantly review their licence, and that is a long-term economic thing in place. And they regularly review, their operating licence on a yearly basis. But they have long-term contracts in place and have done for decades. So I would say, yeah, university is a good way to grow the sport. Same with rugby league, to be honest. But when it comes to facility availability, that's the way, and availability of locations. If you want a ground share, there's long-term agreements in place, and it comes. Then you've got to do security and policing as well, and you would have to use an existing location where there's already an agreement in place. But whether the leaseholder or the club that already owns the facility wants to pay extra for policing costs and security costs, that's another thing entirely. Whoever wants to operate a team or teams would have to fork some of the cost to mitigate as part of the agreement, and that's cost money. And it costs money. Police budgeting and security budgeting costs a lot of money for football clubs and rugby league clubs, and they are feeling that pinch. Arena staff, you have to, as part of like a stadium or arena rental, and this is where ice hockey really suffers, is they have to fork the cost with security. The arena operator will obviously have the contracts in place for security and policing and all that, but the team, part of their operating agreement under their lease, they have to fork the cash towards mitigating the cost for security and policing and staffing for the evening. It costs money. That's another thing that I think will hamper it is the associated support costs, which a lot of fans don't take into consideration. Who do I think Man United should appoint as their new manager? Well, I think the interim Ralph Rangnick was a mistake to have him just till the end of the season. They've been in discussions with Ten Hag, the Ajax manager, but whether he decides to accept the challenge, considering what's gone on before, it'll be interesting. But all the managers that they've had in, apart from David Moyes, have won silverware elsewhere when they were appointed, and they couldn't turn it around. It doesn't matter what league they won the silverware in, for example. It doesn't matter, in my opinion. Other fans about this league or that league. For me, it doesn't matter. So, in that regard, yeah, I honestly think the situation at Man United, there's structural issues within the structures of the club. Even like the greatest managers right now with the best CVs are struggle. Mourinho and Van Gaal struggled. Solskjaer, it wasn't his first rodeo. He has won with Mulder in the Norwegian League and won the Norwegian Cup. Okay, people go, it's the Norwegian League. It's not the same. Doesn't matter. He's had success at another club in another league. He's coached in the Premier League before. It's not as if he's first ever coaching gig. He's got managerial experience. He gets to a European final. If he wins that, we're having a different discussion. Mourinho won the Europa League. Van Gaal wins the FA Cup. But the issues still persist, and they were persisting when Ferguson was still in charge. There were issues since the Glazers took over with structures internally at the club. With the position of Ed Woodward, the issues were long term. It's the structures of the club, and it's the ownership of the club that is the major issue here. Recruitment, overpaying for players, overpaying on contracts, overpaying for transfers. How much say does the actual managers, is commercial interest? Getting Ibrahimovic was a commercial interest. Re-signing Ronaldo, was that for footballing purposes or commercial purposes? I think commercial purposes, because he still draws a lot of merchandise sales, even if his performances have been declining for the last couple of years. That was not a footballing decision for me. Um, the fact they had Mourinho and Van Gaal as two big name managers was a commercial decision, in my opinion. Solskjaer, club legend, commercial opinion, in my decision. Um, the, the way the club is run on a North American franchise model. It does not work in the European footballing model with promotion relegation. It just does not work. It's clear for all to see. It's not working. I don't know who they appoint. I honestly don't. There are managers actually currently out of contract who are available. There's managers under contract who are available. Who they could approach. But then they're spending a lot of money on a get out clause. I don't know. I honestly don't know who they appoint. But whoever they appoint is going to face the same issues their predecessors faced in regards to recruitment, in regards to dealing with transfers, contracts, the behind the scenes, non footballing structures of the club. The priorities are wrong. The stadium needs a bit of TLC. A bit of TLC is an understatement. Fans are regularly commenting on the state of the stadium. Do I think Everton will survive? They're in trouble. They are in trouble. Clubs around them, their form has improved. They are in serious trouble. It's not Lampard's fault. That's a long-term issue with Everton. Same thing. Same thing with Everton in regards to the same issues at Man United. The structures of the club are all wrong. Again, overpaying for players, overpaying on contracts. They've had a lack of managerial stability since David Moyes left. And it's showing on the on-field performances. They're losing youth talent to other clubs. So yeah, long term, the issues that the club are facing are very similar to Man United. They've just been a lot less successful than Man United in the modern era. Trophyless since 1995. This is not their first relegation battle they faced in that period either. Some of their best talent has left the club. They've not wisely invested with some of their contracts. And if they are to get relegated, I mean, there's issues over the stadium rebuild. There's that corruption thing with local government. There's been a corruption investigation, concerns about the planning application being a bit dodgy. It's led to the loss of the UNESCO World Heritage status for the city of Liverpool City Centre, where they want to build the new stadium. But they've been discussing moving away from Goodison for 20 odd years. This is not a new thing. They don't want to invest in Goodison. That's been clear for 20 odd years. I think that's annoyed the fan base as well. But there's been a lot of poorly spent money. They're making massive losses. I don't know where they go. Very loyal fan base. They regularly sell out Goodison, but just look at the managerial mess they've had since David Moyes. There's a lack of direction. I don't know what the direction is for the club. And when you've got former players and fans and the media, independent media especially, I think freelance journalists are the best, questioning the club's spending, the club structures, the direction of the team, the style of play. Questions have to be raised. The decline of the team in the last decade is even more stark than the decline the decade before. And they've gone from one of the most dominant clubs in the 80s and early 90s, where they were, if Liverpool weren't winning all the time, Everton were one of the best teams in England. They won European trophies and FA Cups, and they've appeared and league title. They're not competing anymore. They've gone from competing to the mid-90s Premier League era. It just drops off a cliff. And that's been the case for since '96. They have dropped off a cliff. their youth development was really good. Now it's not. Um, they when they've developed great players like Rooney and Ross Barkley, and they're losing them basically to other clubs, be it domestically or in Europe. They're buying in mercenary players like Man United have been doing for a long time, and it's. I do think if they go down, they're in serious trouble because they already in breach of the profit loss margin rule of 135% losses exceeding profits. There's question marks over the ownership and where the money's come from with the directors' test, with investment since Bill Kenwright, sold his stake. The stadium future, they plan to leave in 3 years' time, but they haven't broken ground on the new stadium yet. Right, the shortlist has been announced. The Dodgers and Cubs owners are on that shortlist. There will be no Saudi takeover. There's a couple of British bids as well. We've basically got 2 months until the special operations license expires. So if a deal isn't done before the 31st of May, it's sticky bum time, as they call it, sweaty swallocks, as I say. They are in serious trouble if they don't get a deal finalised before the 31st of May. If it's after the 31st of May, they are automatically in administration and they'll have points deducted. And they may face a further transfer embargo. That's best case scenario should the license, should they go into administration. If they can get a new owner in before the 31st, there may still be restrictions placed upon the club. And that is an ongoing concern. I can see players leaving in the summer, player turnover. But this is not the first time Chelsea's had ownership issues and money issues. The 80s and 90s, the club was in dire financial straits. Absolutely, really bad finances. But this is what happens when you don't care where the money comes from. And for Chelsea fans, yeah, Abramovich has been a godsend for the club. They won loads of trophies, fine. But for the overall footballing picture, it's not actually been as good for football as it seemed. There's too much money in the sport, not enough questions being asked where the money's come from, where the money goes. The financial UEFA are now bringing in new financial rules, and they are going to slowly cap transfer budgets and spending expenditure to make more clubs profitable and control spending. Because UEFA have said when Serafin took over UEFA, he basically said the financial fair play rules don't work. The system is broken. But it's taken this long to announce there's going to be changes coming in about a season or two's time, where they're going to replace financial fair play with a spending cap kind of rule. I haven't read too much into it, but I do know there's a new rule coming in. If they get a transfer, well, if they've already got players out on loan, they're still contracted and Chelsea properties, so they can be recalled from loan, but they're going to be forced to sell. And again, more youth drive, which they did very well under Lampard, which is now having the success on the field with Tuchel. A lot of those players were accelerated through the youth system, recalled from loan, and got first team football under Lampard. So you can credit Lampard with people go Lampard even shit manager, not very good. But he had constraints when he took over the reins of Chelsea with the transfer embargo that was put in place at the time because of breach of youth transfer rules. So the football club itself has been in this position before with a transfer embargo and having issues signing players. The issue is they've got players coming off contract at the end of the season, as Paqueta and others, Rudiger, Christensen. So 3 of your back 4, who would regularly be the regular back 4, are off contract. And if they don't get then another operating license post 31st May, they will lose those players for nothing. That's the problem. And a new owner may want to have, clean up the situation, refresh the squad anyway. But Chelsea fans are a toxic bunch. I just look at social media; they're so self-entitled, completely. They say it's a witch hunt against them. It really isn't. It's just so happens their owner had linked to the Russian government, and Everton's owner has been under the spotlight as well. So let's pretend this is not. Let's not pretend this is a witch hunt against Chelsea. It's not. Buyback clauses. They've got a lot of players out on loan. They always do. It's going to be interesting. They're going to lose players, regardless if they're under transfer embargo, and not a lot of players are going to leave. Um, We'll have to see what happens in regards to Chelsea. I honestly believe players are going to leave. The uncertainty is. I mean, if you're working for a company and there's uncertainty about pay rises or the long term future of your company, you're going to look for work in the same industry elsewhere where there is job certainty. And players are overpaid. Yes, but they've got mortgages, they've got kids to feed, they may have a dependent, like a parent who's seriously ill or a relative who's seriously ill, they have to pay medical expenses for. They've got, pay their bills. You know, it's not just they're well paid. Um, you know, if they're not getting paid, they're going to be financially worse off. And if you were in the same position with, say, an employer going, we're facing administration here, we may have to lay you off, we may have to freeze your wage rises, you may not get a pay rise this year. You're going to look in the same industry elsewhere, if you can. You're going to talk to your union rep about, we're concerned here, what's our future? In the real world, outside of sport, you will be looking for employment elsewhere, you'll be looking at your employment rights, severance packages. You've got to put your finances in order, bills, if you're paying rent, if you're paying a mortgage, if you've got a kid with a medical condition, if you're supporting other members of your family because they can't work for health reasons, or they've retired, or they've got long-term health issues that limit their employment to part-time. Just because a player is on big money doesn't mean they're their parents or grandparents or siblings or wife or whatever are on the same salary, because they will also want to work. So that's a big thing. And then people go, well, this is why loads of ex-players don't get into management. Correct. They need job certainty post-retirement. That's why a lot of them go into the media. It gives them job certainty. And that's something that's got to change as well. And I think that's part of the new UEFA rulings when it comes to spending, the new spending rules they're going to be bringing in to replace financial fair play. If Chelsea have got players out on loan at Palace and they are playing Palace in the FA Cup semi-final, that's going to be an interesting fixture, that one. They are in a serious situation. It is clearly affecting the players on the field. I have no doubt that's a distraction they don't want. I'm going to put this in real terms. Yes, it's going to affect Chelsea in getting players who are got buyback clauses or are out on loan with the option to buy at a reduced fee and recall from loan and all that. And this is where Chelsea played a system and the system beat them. They were playing the loan system and the youth system. They got caught out transfer embargo a couple of years ago, and now because of the sanctions against their owner, they've still been playing that system and it's bitten them again. And that is a problem. It's going to be interesting to see what happens. The uncertainty around the Chelsea situation is there. Obviously, there is a time expediency to get a new owner in place before the end of May. It's going to be interesting if a deal gets done. Now, the Ricketts family, who own the Chicago Cubs, Chelsea fans do not want them as an owner. They've made that very clear that they're not happy with the Ricketts family being on the shortlist. The Dodgers owners are also on the shortlist. Now, Major League Baseball has obviously been in the headlines for its lockout and owners versus players. And basically, the owners wanted to make as much money as possible with spending as little money as possible, basically, in regards to Major League Baseball. The economics there are obviously a different league structure, different ways of doing business. But that's something that is, to be, noted. Another American style ownership model. I don't think necessarily that's the best way for football to go. There's a lot of clubs in English football with American money, and Scottish clubs as well now with American money. And the style of ownership is completely different. The league structures are completely different. And look what's happened to Man United. And the fans were never happy with the Glazers taking over, ever. There's always been resistance. The leverage takeover, the Man United takeover following Abramovich's takeover is why we have the director's test. because it was a leverage takeover. And you look at Randy Lerner at Aston Villa, left them in a terrible situation. Gillette and Hicks, the former Liverpool owners, they got convicted of fraud in the end. That left Liverpool in a terrible situation before the Fenway Sports Group took them over a decade ago. American money hasn't always benefited the sport in this country either, so that's something else to be fully aware of. I heard Chelsea want to agree. Yeah, they do want to have a buyback clause. The thing is, I think Palace want to keep their squad together, and if they win the FA Cup, they're going to want to entice talent to stay or new talent to join. Because they do want to also redevelop Selhurst Park, increase the capacity, and modernise the stadium. So they obviously want success in the FA Cup because that brings prize money, that brings European football to the club. That will bring eyes to the club, investment to the club, and Vieira's doing a brilliant job. Brilliant job. He inherited the club in a good position from Roy Hodgson, and he's taken it that next step. That's my opinion. I think Roy Hodgson did a solid job there, and you know, Chris Palace has got American money as well. Now, I'm not saying domestically based owners are brilliant for the game. They're not. There's some shocking British-based owners in British football, past and present, who damaged the reputation of the sport in this country. And that is something to be considered and looked at, in my opinion. It is. There's no doubt on that. But yeah, Chelsea are in a bit of trouble. They are in a bit of trouble. Now, I've got a lot of friends and who are Chelsea fans. I have a lot of sympathy for the fan base, the loyal fan base. However, you reap what you sow. And Abramovich has been interested in selling the club for about 3 years now. This is not a new story. It's just the expediency has been sped up because of the sanctions against Russian businesses and individuals. But he was open to offers back in 2018, 2019. He was open to sell the club if the right offer came along. So I don't know where all this shock and surprise has come from in recent weeks. Abramovich was always on the record saying he was, open to the right offer to buy the club. The fact that the club had 1.5 million in debt owed to the owner is a concern. The fact that they don't own their own stadium is a concern. The fact they've had a transfer embargo under Abramovich's ownership, and they were in breach of youth transfer rules is a concern. So just because Abramovich has brought the success to the club doesn't necessarily mean the club has actually been as well run as Chelsea fans believe. There has been some questionable decisions taken by Chelsea over the years. The high managerial turnover is ridiculous. I believe that's a negative to the Abramovich era. The debt the club has incurred, 1.5 billion. If they were a standalone entity, they would have definitely been in administration liquidation long before this current situation. And that's under Abramovich's ownership. And the fans are going, but he's going to write off the debt. But you shouldn't be in that position. You should not be in that position. That is a situation that a lot of clubs are facing, is the stupid amounts of debt they're in. And it's not just Chelsea. Look at Barcelona. Look at Real Madrid. Look at Tottenham. The amount of debt incurred by clubs in recent years is ridiculous, and it should never have been allowed to happen. But then you look at UEFA with the financial fair play, and it's a joke. It's a joke. Hence why Serafin, when he got elected as UEFA president following Platini's legal troubles, said this system doesn't work. We need to find a replacement. The fact it's taken them this long to come up with a new business model plan for clubs is ridiculous. It should have been happened much sooner. It would have probably helped cushion the blow of the pandemic, which has fully exposed financial fair play, the failure it was, and the poor financial governance within, and the weak governance within football for what it was. I do believe Serafin is the right guy to take UEFA forward. I honestly believe that. However, the institutional problems he has inherited within European football is plain for all to see. It's not going to be a quick fix. And club owners and clubs are going to have to realise their days of feckless spending are over. They're going to be over very, very soon. The losses some of these massive clubs that should be profitable beyond belief are making is ridiculous. I think the financial issues at Barcelona predate the pandemic by a long way, because for years they were one of those clubs that said we don't need a shirt sponsor, we don't need that. They now have a shirt sponsor. The Neymar transfer now is the red flag, when they were forced to sell Neymar. He's going to be the future, superstar of the club to replace Messi. They sell him, and then it's revealed how many billions of euros of debt they're in. I always said that the pandemic sped up the money bubble in football bursting. I honestly believe that we would be in this financial situation within football just further down the line, like 5 or so years in the future. COVID pandemic sped up the financial overheating of the industry. The reckless speculation, it got exposed. And when clubs were saying, "Oh, we could let in fans for next to nothing and still make massive money," yeah, the French TV deals collapsed. The TV deals in Spain, Germany, and England and Italy are worth less in real terms. BT Sport, as a British broadcaster, has been hemorrhaging money from day one, badly. We've already had the collapse of the ITV Sport network 20 years ago. We've had the collapse of Setanta in British sports, TV rights. The pay-per-view, Premier League pay-per-view desperation to try and recoup some cash was an unmitigated disaster. They claimed it didn't work for commercial reasons. No, it didn't work because the fans boycotted. They'd already tried that model before when ITV Sport was still a going concern as a separate subscription sports network on the Sky package 20 years ago. It lasted a season, I think maybe 2 seasons, and it was at a much more competitive rate of what it cost per game, £5 per game, not 50. And it failed then. Why repeat the same action again, expecting a different outcome? It's called madness. That just shows how greedy, the TV companies are and the clubs are. That was just an absolute mess. It was badly thought out, and fans spoke with their wallets. If only 86 households purchased Burnley West Brom, 86 people were willing to purchase that legally without illegally streaming it. That tells you all you need to know about how badly a half-cocked up idea it was. It was sheer desperation to try and recoup losses, rather than properly enforce the fit and proper persons test, properly enforce financial fair play rules by actually sanctioning clubs, fining clubs, and docking points. The profit loss rule of 135%. If they were to properly enforce all these rules, 60 to 70% of the clubs in the top 4 flights of English football would have minus points to start the season, and that's a bad look to have. You can't have that. You can't have that. Can't have that at all. Tottenham would be docked points. Chelsea would be docked points. Man United would be docked points. No, we can't have that because they're, the big 6. Can't have them being punished. But then you've got clubs like Bury who were running to the ground, going out of business. Macclesfield going out of business. But you can't have the big boys getting in trouble. It has to be the little guy. Derby County, they made an example of Derby County and Reading in the Championship. But the rest of the Championship is in breach of the profit loss rule of 135% financial fair play, including Blackburn, my club, who are currently in a playoff spot. But we can't have certain clubs. We can only, we'll punish certain clubs, but not others. Wolves have been in breach of financial fair play, not punished. It makes a mockery of a system when you're not properly enforcing the rules. 60 to 70% of the clubs in the Football League pyramid from League 2 to Premier League would be in breach of financial fair play and the profit loss rule. The study, there's data out there, and financial data is there for all to see for who's in breach. It's a joke. They should properly enforce the rules by the book, but they refuse to because it looks embarrassing that they've been so weak in governance for so long that they've allowed the situation to manifest itself, which has obviously led to this situation we are currently in, where clubs are basically broke and they're badly run, and it's a mess. Who's phoning me? Hang on a second. Hello, bud. Can I phone you back? Bad time, bud. Yeah, I'm busy. Yeah, bad time. Give us about 40 minutes. Perfect. Perfect. All right, mate. Sorry about that. Friend phoned me. So yeah, we'll go for another half hour, and then I've got to call him back, or he's going to call me back. Um, yeah, I think we would see a different league table if clubs have been punished accordingly. Absolutely. And there is no denying that. Absolutely, we would see a completely different league table structure, etc., etc. Um, and the FA, the Premier League, and the EFL, it would make them look really stupid because they've allowed this situation to manifest itself. And UEFA are fully aware that financial fair play rules, you can just get there's too many loopholes. It's too weakly enforced. It doesn't do the job. The guy who came up with the financial fair play rules said this doesn't work. Um, it didn't work in the beginning. There was too much club pressure to water down the rules in the first place, and he was constrained in the rules that he came up with. He's like, it doesn't work. But the fact that, yeah, the guy in charge of UEFA, Serafin, came out when he was elected saying, we don't, no, this rule doesn't work. We need to find a solution. Fair play to him for being brave enough to basically say, our structures don't work. We need to reform. I do believe he is the right guy to reform the organisation. But the fact it's taken as long as it has to come up with a solution which doesn't get implemented for another year or two, and it's still only on the proposal. It hasn't been fully fixed yet to replace financial fair play. They've had a long time to scrap the current system and implement a new system and tell the clubs you either comply by this or be sanctioned. And the clubs have again tried to water down. The club owners have tried to water down the new proposals as well, and that's not acceptable. Yes. For too many years, football doesn't care where the money's come from. Look at the FIFA situation with Qatar. Tells you what you need to know. There's going to be now a shift. There's a change now, and it's coming. And the COVID pandemic has sped up that change. The change is long overdue. It's the finances aren't viable in the Championship and below. They're in a complete and utter mess. Not enough. So badly structured. The TV deal is a mess of how it's structured and how the money gets distributed. It's a mess, which is unacceptable. And yeah, we are where we are. So we'll have to see what changes come. But I fear that we've reached a point where clubs are going to try and resist, or maybe try and water down some of the expectations with the new rules that are going to replace financial fair play in coming seasons. I read a little bit on it, and it is a layered kind of layered structure. So there's a mitigating level of compliance has to reach these percentages over the first 3 years. And if they fail to meet those levels that they put in for expenditure over loss or profit over loss, the idea is to reduce spending but make clubs profitable again at all levels, not just the top level, but all levels of the professional game across Europe. And I look at it, and there is a tier structure. So each season, the remit and the level you can hit is on a scaling, reducing scale. And there's an adjustment period where they have to be compliant by a certain point and then stick with that compliance long term. Yes, I think wage deflation needs to have more wages need to be capped at an upper level for a period. I think the age of big transfers will be coming to an end before too long. I think when the new rules come into force, we won't see the record-breaking Neymar transfer. Not for a long time, until finances have stabilised long term, and then clubs are paying off their debt, becoming profitable again. I think it needs to happen. Wage deflation is a bad thing, though. Falling wages is a bad thing, but a wage freeze, wage stagnation, maybe at the top level, needs to happen. But I think a wage salary cap is coming in some form, um, because the wage inflation, almost hyperinflation over the last 30 years, is definitely killing um, sport. There's too much money, and it's the fans who pay the price. It's the non-playing club staff in the administrative side and in the club shops and in the club training grounds. It's the lowly paid club staff that are the ones who lose their jobs first when a new owner or an owner goes, "Oh, we need to cut costs. We can reduce club shop staff by 20%. We'll only open the club shop on match days and in the summer transfer window. We'll reduce shop staff in the club shop by 20%, or we'll reduce opening hours or whatever." They get impacted first. Then a new owner may come in, have a restructuring of the business model or whatever, and it's the non-playing administrative and sales staff that get impacted. A lot more internet payments for tickets, so they're produced electronically rather than turnstile staff on match days. They try and get cheaper contracts for security, a whole host of things. Groundskeeping staff, they'll have their budgets reduced, whatever. They're the ones to feel the impacts of changes first. There needs to be a constant battle against wage inflation. Look at rugby union with Mark. So yes, there needs to be appropriate wage increases season on season. We've seen other sports come in with a flat cap for a couple of years to try and arrest wage inflation and make it more realistic wage rises on an acceptable scale. So the player notice every league that has a salary cap system, that the players are better paid than they ever have been. And if it's properly enforced, the wages go up. The salary cap level goes up, so there's a little bit more wiggle room, and you can earn good money. But yes, the multiple cap breaches, again, weak governance. Two clubs at the same time breaching the cap. It was almost like they were doing it together, like they were fully aware of what they were doing. And Leicester were a bit more scientific about it and worked out, if we cross this threshold, we get a points deduction. If we're below this threshold, we get away with a fine. Leicester were very smart with their cap breach. Saracens less so. And the Saracens one was already, investigative journalists had already gone, they're assembling a pretty solid squad here that's better than the rest of the league by some distance. Let's have a look at how they've assembled this. And some freelance journalists were very, very good. Rugby leagues have the same one in the NRL and Super League as well. A lot of clubs have minor breaches, and some clubs like Melbourne Storm, Canterbury Bulldogs, Parramatta Eels have bigger breaches. Some are better at it than others. Parramatta was so amateur. They put it on the public record as well, on the actual public record, which was just suicide for them. And they're still facing issues because now they're being sued by people who are owed money on third party. That's a mess for big money. Yes, there definitely needs to be stronger enforcement and punishment for breaching rules. But again, we'll have to see what happens long term. Weakly enforced financial rules for so long have led to the mess that professional sport globally finds itself in. Not just football. It's other sports seem to be better run financially than others, but poor governance in a lot of areas has led to a lot of scandal in the last few years that's come to earth and come to light. And a lot of it's to do with initially weak governance in a little area, or that one bad apple rotting the whole bunch, basically. One rotten fruit by itself rots. When you put it in fresh fruit, it's not rotting. The rot spreads, and it starts from a small bit of indifference or corruption, and it just spreads through an organisation. Bad culture spreads. The tax authorities, well, this is look at what's happened in Spain with tax evasion and tax avoidance. Fines and suspended sentences have been handed out. Messi, Ronaldo, Xabi Alonso, Mourinho, with players and coaches have been Mascherano. They've been caught out, and they were trying to hide their earnings, which again was a sign that financially these clubs weren't being well run and well governed long before the European Super League was their holy grail to save us from the mess we've got ourselves into. So yeah, there is that. Um, so yeah, the whole situation has been poorly dealt with for a long time, and it is what it is. Like there is no hiding from the fact that poor financial management, dodgy financial dealings, the role of agents. We keep coming back to this: the lack of regulation over player agents has been in the talking point for a long time. It doesn't get. I mean, we've had Mike Neill, the former Luton manager, talking about having bungs, dodgy payments to player agents. Um, it's about 15, 16 years ago. He hasn't been back in management since. He's been blacklisted pretty much. No club wants to touch him because he basically said player agents are getting away with dodgy dealings and bribery and corruption. And he basically went out and said, yeah, he wanted to sign a player or something or re-sign a player, extend the contract, and he just said, I've had enough of this. I've had enough of this. This needs to stop. And he basically came clean on there are dodgy agents operating within our sport who are taking dirty payments and bribes, and yeah, you've got to pay a bribe to an agent to get a deal done. He hasn't managed since, Mike Neill. He's been out of management since, and he was a young, promising manager at the time at Luton, and he's basically been blacklisted by the Football League and Premier League unofficially because no club has approached him to manage. And then Sam Allardyce getting caught out to get around transfer rules, basically telling like an undercover reporter how to do it, which is what Mike Neill was saying. This is what happens. This is what you have to do within the sport to get transfers over the line. Sometimes you have to. Unfortunately, it's frustrating. He's I'm blowing a little this, and the FA were appalled by his comments, and he was fined for his comments because the FA is fully aware of what's going on, fully aware. And Mike Neill wanted to expose the system. Sam Allardyce did expose the system by basically losing his job because he was stupid and greedy enough and arrogant enough to basically say, this is what you do, to an undercover reporter. He sort of entrapped them, but there were rumours going around that certain managers don't mind paying the bribes and don't mind paying the bungs and breaking transfer rules. And Mike Neill was one of those managers who had enough of the system and the dodginess in the system. Doesn't matter what level of the sport you're playing in. And he basically went on the record publicly saying, this is what goes on. This needs to stop. The FA needs to take action. And the FA fined him for his comments. And he hasn't been in ownership since. Management since, sorry. And that's a young, promising English manager who was a good player as well. He was a Premier League winner. Blacklisted out of the game unofficially. Just hasn't. No club has touched him since. No one wants to go, we'll have him as a manager because he basically outed the dodginess and the corruption within the sport. And the FA were like, we know about this, shut up. And he refused. So he's basically been unofficially blackballed, which is wrong. And he was a young, promising manager at the time, and he's been out of the game for 15 years. Hasn't been back in management since. No club wants to touch him. No agent wants to deal with him because he lifted the lid on it. And then Sam Allardyce, years later, basically says, this is how you break the rules on transfers. This is how you do it. You offer incentives to agents and players that are not above below board, backhanders. And yeah, it is what it is. And we know it happens with other sports. We know it goes on. It's widely known that player agents or player agencies, there's a lot of dodgy dealings, gratuities where you give freebies to get round rules and dodginess. We know it goes on. We know that Melbourne had a second set of financial books with the salary cap breach when they were doing it in the NRL. We know Collingwood, I think it was Carlton were doing it in the AFL with a dodgy second set of ledgers 20 odd years ago. So it happens globally. We know it's happened with the NHL. With some dodgy owners. We know it's happened in the NFL, the Major League Baseball, the NBA. We know it's happened in motorsport. We've seen a lot of dodgy dealings in a lot of the major sports leagues around the world in regards to contracts, sponsorships, third-party payments. league rules are weakly enforced when it comes to these things. And when someone like a Mike Neal wants to come out and say, I've had enough of this, I've got to blow the lid, they're basically unofficially blacklisted and told to shut up and go away. Now, it'll be interesting to see what Mike Newell still has to say, or whether he just turns his back on the sport, going, "The sport's corrupt as hell. I've had enough of it." He was a brilliant player, a solid player, not world class, but he was a good, solid professional. Premier League winner with Blackburn. He's played in the Champions League. He's won the Premier League title. He was an up and coming manager, and then at Luton he just had enough. I'll have to look at what he exactly said, but I'm going to have to look at his profile and look at articles, because they're on the record, the articles and his interviews and all that. But he was definitely correct in what he was saying. Unfortunately, they don't want to deal with someone who wants to expose the dodgy practices. So it is what it is. Anyway, I'm going to have to actually go and phone my friend back and sort some bits and pieces out. But thank you very much, obviously, for all your questions. And of course, we had to end on I would say a little bit of a sour note, but it's a known thing. And it comes back again to stricter financial regulation, properly enforcing the rules. And yeah, the FA have been warned about this. The FA have been warned about there is too much money in the sport. If the sport was more transparent with its financial dealings, and there was an approved list of player agents, similar like to the medical register, where you have a doctor or a nurse on the doctor's register, where you can be struck off for malpractice. Yeah, and there's been allegations of corruption in an administrative sense for a long time. This is not match fixing corruption. This is corrupt dealings in regards to player contracts, transfers, third party payments, breaching of rules, and all that. But yeah, so there you go. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I'll have some more videos coming later today. But thank you very much for watching, and I'll have some more videos for you very, very soon.